Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to another edition of the Vet Method podcast, where we bring team training concepts to independent veterinary practice owners who want to grow revenues through a high-performance team. My name is Sanjay Mangabai, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Rachel Lemcke. Hi, Rachel. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, whereabouts are you today, Rachel?
I am in the Northeast United States. I am in New Jersey.
Okay. And I believe it's a brilliant day over there today.
It's a little scorching for my taste. It's okay.
Okay, we could easily swap days. In the UK, we have very rare good days, and today we're experiencing one of those, so that's great. Okay, so a little bit about Rachel. Rachel is the founder of Amwell Data Services, a full-service independent veterinary laboratory consulting agency. And beyond the lab, she's an avid orchid grower, an amateur painter, and an adopted cat mum. Okay, Rachel, that sounds like you're very busy and very creative outside of work.
Yes, I'd like to think so, but...
What kind of things do you paint?
It depends. Short answer is it started out pretty things like orchids and hummingbirds, and it's transitioning to more of a conservation or like humanities-based topics.
Fantastic. So, it sounds like you sorted out this work-life thing. You have a life outside work, which is great.
I try to.
Okay, so the title of the podcast is Demystifying Laboratory Test Pricing in Veterinary Medicine. And we're going to talk about that for the next 7 minutes or so. Okay, Rachel, our time starts now. So, question number one, who is your ideal client?
I serve veterinarians and their teams.
Okay, so anyone who has a lab maybe or anything like that?
Yeah, so some practices have, they're fortunate enough to have in-house laboratory services, and there's other practices that they might have some point of care testing on site, but they send out a lot of other things. So I can work with both types. Okay,
so it sounds like you work with the entire practice and the individual team members within the practice.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, perfect. That leads us nicely on to question number two. What's the biggest problem your clients face and how do you solve it?
Biggest problem is an under-leveraged and underutilized laboratory or laboratory services. So basically, they could be doing so much more with what they're already doing by optimizing day-to-day workflows, and that makes room for some really cool projects.
Okay, so you help them get better value, get better use out of their lab equipment and all the lab opportunities that are available in practice, yeah? Fantastic, great. Question number three, what are the typical symptoms that people experience with their problem? They're sort of pain points.
One of the biggest things I've come across is kind of communication breakdowns or increased turnaround times. Sometimes samples would go missing, which we can all imagine that's like a really big headache, especially when you have to go back to the client. That gets really awkward. But basically bottlenecks in the lab, whether that's time, whether that's communication or other things. And profit leakage is another thing, right? Like if the ROIs aren't there that they're expecting, or those are big symptoms.
Okay, so you mentioned a few things there. One is maybe organization in the lab, misplacing lab samples, maybe mislabeling them. We've had those issues in practice. You're so busy, you forget to put the right patient details on the sample, etc. And then you mentioned return on investment. That's a big topic in itself. That's about pricing and working out how much your lab actually costs to run, apart from individual tests and things. Okay, so fantastic. So those are some of the symptoms. Question number four. What are the common mistakes that people make when trying to solve that problem? The things they thought were going to work, but were never going to. The things they try but fail.
If I want to focus on specifically lab testing out of all of those issues, I feel like most practices don't actually incorporate all of the costs that go into the test. Like some diagnostic companies will say, oh, your CBC cost, if you run this many a day, the price is X. But like that's your cost. That's not actually your cost. That's the cost for those reagents to run that machine, but it's not the cost of the machine purchase or lease price or QC costs or labor to run the QC or the time it takes to run the test that you're paying your staff for or any retest that you have to do. Like there's a lot more involved than just like one simple, easy number. And I feel like a lot of practices don't even really know how much time it takes their staff on average to do a particular procedure. So then how do you even calculate, what your costs or your price should be?
Absolutely. And that leads to a lot of sort of disenfranchisement with the whole lab thing when you don't understand the costs. Yeah. And I've fallen victim to that, where somebody wanting to sell you some lab equipment gives you those kind of numbers, the cost per test. And if you do 20 tests a week, it should, cover the cost, and then the extra 10 tests are going to make you money. But it never quite works out like that, because no one accounts for wastage, no one accounts for the time someone's running those tests. Then there's postage, then there's all sorts of things, and it costs a lot more than that. So, and if you don't get the pricing, if you don't incorporate the pricing into the cost of the test to the client, then how do you get return on investment?
Sometimes you don't. That's why I'm here.
You absolutely don't. Absolutely. Okay, good. Thank you. Let's go on to question number 5. What is one valuable free action that someone listening to this can implement that will help them solve that problem? What's your top tip?
So I had mentioned kind of measuring and accounting for labor, and that's something that every practice can do. They can just ask their tech to, start a timer on their phone or a normal stopwatch and just figure out how many minutes on average it takes them to run each type of test, and then average that among all of their technicians. And then they'll have an idea of how much actual labor they've already been paying for to run these tests. And they can use that number to better set their prices.
Okay, so we know how much, we should know how much our team costs per hour.
You should. That's maybe step 1 is back up and figure out, salary or hourly wage, and then benefits and things like that. And then you have that number.
Yeah, and it's not just their wage cost, it's their overall overhead cost of the whole practice that sometimes needs to be built in as well. Well, not sometimes, it needs to be built in as well to make it at least profitable rather than just break even, or more commonly a loss. Great. So let's go to question number 6. Only 2 questions to go. What is one valuable free resource that you can direct people to that will further help them with that problem?
So I was thinking about what I could, how I could best serve your listeners with this. And this might sound a little strange. I've made a really kind of short micro course that's fully digital. It's all online. It's called the 30-Day Lab Makeover, a microcourse for optimizing the veterinary laboratory. And it has within it a big, basically cost of goods sold template that you input all of your costs, you input all your client prices, and it automatically calculates your markups and your margins in the lab. And I want to share that with your audience. So if they use the code Evolve the Lab, it's free for them. So that's a free, totally customizable template that they can take and run with. They can use it in all throughout their practice. They don't just have to use it in the lab. It also breaks down how I calculate labor. So I calculate it both as an active set of labor and an inactive set of labor. So active is like you're physically touching the sample, you're manipulating the sample, you're labeling a tube, something like that, versus inactive is like something's running in the centrifuge or something's running in the machine, and the employee has the option of doing something else in that time. So it breaks down all of that, and I think that would be most beneficial for your listeners.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds like really great value. So it's the 30-day microcourse, lab microcourse.
Yeah, the 30-day lab makeover. And it covers way more than fiscal too, but fiscal is a huge chunk of it.
And they can get it for free if they put in the code Evolve the Lab.
Yes, so they can access it from my website, amwelldataservices.com, and there's a page on there for the microcourse, and they can get it that way.
Wow, Rachel, it sounds like this is something that anybody hoping to start a practice or become a practice owner should really do. You know, I wish something like this was available when I started my practices, because it's getting the foundation right.
Yes.
Getting the pricing right from day one, and making you think about a strategy rather than just funding the practice down the road and seeing how much they charge and let's charge the same amount. Everyone's got different overheads and things like that. So that's really valuable. Fantastic. And finally, Rachel, what's the one question that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people ask, why did you pick the lab? Like of everything in vet med, you know, of everything to like specialize in, why did you pick the laboratory? And I feel like that veterinarians and their teams can do so much more with those same resources, and it can help them. Basically, it can help them help themselves better. They can do more and get more from that room. Whether they, you know, when you have more time, when you have more time, or when you have more money, you can apply that in different parts of the practice. So, okay, if you need another technician, you can fund it. You know, you don't have to look for resources or, you know, outside of the lab. You can use what you already have and just make it that much better and that much more effective.
You know, you're absolutely right. You just remind me that, with the advent of corporate practices and, you know, big groups, etc., a lot of the services in veterinary practice have become commoditized. Okay, flea products, you know, even, you know, consulting fees, etc. But it's very hard to commoditize laboratory fees. Because it's a very individual thing. It depends not just on the cost of the test, but something we forget to put in our pricing is the interpretation of those tests, which is, in theory, more valuable than the test itself. Okay, and that's something that is very difficult for competitors to compete with or to undercut. You can undercut the test, but they can't undercut the value that comes along with it. So, yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you. Wow, we've already done the 7 questions, Rachel. That was really interesting and very helpful. You're definitely, I think, fulfilling your mission, to make for a more efficient day-to-day, running of the operations in a veterinary practice that not only helps the patient and the team, but also, I think, bolsters and sustains revenues. Just going back to the title of the podcast, making the lab the true asset that it should be, and not something to shy away from. Not only that, but I think you're helping to make veterinary careers more enjoyable, more sustainable, and especially right now where recruitment is a bit of an issue. The lab may be one area that people can start to really enjoy and find some fulfillment in. So, I'm sure our listeners, myself included, will take away some valuable insights. Certainly, the 30-day micro course seems really valuable as a good starting point. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, Rachel.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.